First speaker. He told me to be brief. It's not easy to do. He flew 14 bombing missions with the 484th Bomb Group and 39 missions with the Office of Strategic Services, dropping supplies and agents behind enemy lines. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross for the well-known covert mission Operation Greenup, chronicled in the 2012 TV movie The Real and Glorious Bastards. He was a commercial airline pilot from 1947 to 1983 with TWA and Eastern Airlines, and has been flying Angel flights regularly from 2005 to current. I could go on, but let's hear from the real deal himself. Please welcome John Billings.
I fly, and I love it. I started with my first lesson. I have to relate that. August 7th, 1937. That was a Taylor Cub, predating Piper for you pilots in the audience. It had a tail dragger. It was a tail dragger, I mean, and that really means dragging because there was no wheel back there. There was no tail wheel. And if you wanted to stay where you were at that moment, you made sure that the stick was back to keep the back into the airplane on the ground. If you wanted to go, you put the throttle up, push forward, lift up the tail, and go. No brakes. After a while, the little strip of steel on the wooden part of the tail dragger would wear through, so they just unscrew it and put on another piece of metal, and that was a brake job. I learned to fly really in the Army, and that was fantastic. I got the best training that I can imagine. I was lucky that happened to be in the right place at the right time when they changed their system of training. Anyway, instead of going through primary, basic, and advanced training, and then getting your gold bar and your wings, then almost immediately you were sent to the combat zone. And the airplane that you flew in combat, it might have been the first time that you ever went in that airplane. But not so with me, lucky me. I had 106 hours of training in the left seat. However, each period of flight training, there were 6 of us. One would be in a left seat, one would be in a co-pilot seat, one would be doing navigation duties, one would be doing flight engineer duties, another one would be doing duties of the radio operator. In other words, we were not taught that you're going to have a crew. You were taught what each crew member was required to do. And then after that, we were given a crew, and that crew stayed together for the whole combat missions. And doing it that way, we became a unit. Almost immediately, you knew exactly what other people were doing on your crew. In the movies, of course, the commander, he would shout orders to the co-pilot and so forth, I hardly ever said anything to the co-pilot on a mission. Because I knew that he knew what he needed to do, and he knew that I knew that. After the 14th completed bomb mission, I was assigned to OSS. They didn't tell me why, but I guess. You see, everybody in headquarters knew I loved to fly, so any detail, I was ready to go do it. I took a number of missions where their command pilot didn't feel good, didn't want to go, so I took theirs. That meant that I had points for getting home more than they did. And they were worried that we wouldn't go home together. I did tell them that I would stay until the last man had enough. But as it turned out, they wouldn't let me do that. So each one of them would volunteer for taking over somebody's job and getting another mission, another point for going home. Well, after the 14th, my 14th completion, my 4 back gunners, the 2 ace gunners, and turret in the belly and the turret in the tail, they went on the same mission. At first I thought they went on the same airplane, but no, it was different airplanes. However, all 4 of them did not come back. And at that time we had no idea of what happened to them, other than they didn't come back, their airplanes. 3 days later, we were in the back of a truck, we meaning the rest of the crew, the 6, and we were headed for Brindisi, where the OSS. We picked up 2 people there. I don't know why they were not on a crew, but so we had our 8 men. That's what the OSS crew was 8. There was no bottom turret. Instead, they put a sheet of aluminum around the hole that was there, just to make sure that nothing would snag. If you're a ball gunner, you know that the well that was there was full of bolts and pieces of metal and so forth. Well, that you couldn't use that for jumping out. And they named the hole the Joe hole, because in the OSS, you weren't told everything. You're only told that which they determined you needed to know. You weren't supposed to learn the names. You weren't supposed to even talk to the agents that we were letting out through the Joe hole. Every person that did that, his name was Joe. By the way, I learned after the fact that one of the Joes was Josephine. But we were not supposed to even use the term OSS. That was not, and anything outside our little realm in the airplane, we didn't know about. Things that we learned later when it all became declassified and books written about it and so forth. But that's how I got to the OSS. I did 39 missions with them. Now, rewind to the 484th. Only one one time did I see the German fighter. And that happened after we couldn't keep up with the squadron, and we had to turn back. And we were still right around 20,000 feet. And the reason we turned back was that it was the coldest day that I have ever seen. It was 67 degrees below 0 centigrade. That was cold. And the grease that was in the mica blocks where the control cables had to bend solidified such that I couldn't move the yoke, I couldn't move the ailerons. And we were gliding right into the formation, and my co-pilot immediately saw what was going on, and he grabbed the wheel too. With both of us, it broke loose, and of course the airplane suddenly went away from the. Well, I turned on the autopilot, and it took over. Unlike today's autopilot, the autopilot servos in the B-24, a human being couldn't overpower, which was done on purpose for problems when perhaps a shell would come through and cut a cable. The autopilot was there waiting, ready. That same day, when we went through the area where the gunners routinely test fired their guns, every gunner reported that the gun would fire one round, but it wouldn't put another one in the chamber. So, in a sense, we were without guns. Now, when we were still north of the front line, and my bottom turret gunner called up and said, "I just saw an airplane take off, a fighter just take off." Because I thought he had exceptional eyes. Fighter plane doesn't make a very big image from above 20,000 feet. But I handled the situation. I said, "Well, keep an eye on it." And that was that. We go along. Pretty soon, 5 minutes later, he says, "I'm sorry, Skipper, I lost sight of him. He's out in front of us someplace." I thought, well, his eyes are good. And the B-24, those of you who are not pilots, B-24, the sliding windows in the cockpit has a big, like a half of a ball cut. So you could stick your head out the window, so to speak, and look straight down, forward, and everything. My co-pilot had his head in there. All of a sudden, he jumped and hit his head on the thing as he was doing it. He opened his mouth, and the tail turret said, "Bandit 6 o'clock going away." And so I said, "All guns aim, all guns aim." What else can we do? In the meanwhile, my radio operator had told me that he needed to go back to the relief troops. And I'm sure you all know what that is. And he got out through the Bombay and into the back just about the time when the airplane had turned around and climbed up, and he was going to start his run on that tail. And he said, "What's going on?" He says, the gunner said, "ME-109 is attacking us." He says, "Well, shoot." He told George that It wouldn't work because the grease was too stiff. George pushed the gunner aside. By the way, George wasn't a big man. He was, but he pushed him aside and opened the gun, took the block out, wiped it all over his flight suit, put it back in, closed it, and test fired. And of course, at that time, I could look behind the co-pilot through the window and I could see him coming, and I saw and felt the gun go off, but I could see the traces. He must have been 2,000 yards out there. No, not anywhere near a danger for him from our guns at that range. And instead of making a beautiful curve down back, he just kept on going, went straight down. Well, he disappeared and didn't come back. Of course, he didn't know that the rest of the guns didn't work. But one ME-109, the early models, now, I don't know if it was early or late, but late models, they had 20mm cannons, but otherwise they had 7.62 machine guns. And there's no comparison. B-24 can handle, one B-24 can handle one ME-109. Firepower is way in favor of the B-24. But George came back up. He stood between us, that is, me and my co-pilot, and said, "I'm sorry." I said, "What do you mean, George, you're sorry?" He says, "Well, I fired too soon, so we couldn't get a paint job on the outside of our airplane, a fighter, you know, with an X through it." I said, "If you weren't so damn ugly, I'd give you a kiss right now." I know typically we're supposed to think about missions and all that sort of stuff, but that's not all the things we did. There were other activities. For instance, my bombardier and I loved to shoot, and we bartered with cartons of cigarettes quite a number of people out of their guns. And we'd go out in the countryside and shoot. And one day, Dick said, "You know, my hobby was taxidermy." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Let's go out in the field and I'll shoot a magpie and you watch where it falls off the tree and guide me up there, and then I'll stuff it." I thought, well, I know he was an avid shooter, but what we were going to shoot the magpie with was a .30 carbine. You get it? But I went along with it, and we went out walking, and there we found one. It was about 50, 75 yards away on a dead branch, and he's sitting there singing his heart out. And Dick sat down on the ground, the knees up, the elbows on the knees, you know, the typical marksman, and seemed like forever, but finally it went bang, and boom, the bird went to the ground. So I kept my own eye on that spot, and he went up, turned around a couple of times, and I gave him hand signals, and then he reached down and grabbed something. So I went down there, and here's this little bird in his hand, you know, looking at first at Dick and then me. Didn't seem to be all that hurt. Well, I said, now how are you going to do this? What do you do? Wring his neck or something? And Dick, the mighty hunter, he says, well, John, he's not hurt bad. And what happened was the bullet went through the elbow and knocked off the outer wing panel of well, I forget whether it's right or left on that. Anyway, I said, well, you can't just let him go. He won't be able to get food and all that stuff. He says, yeah, you're right. Let's take him back to the tent. And he said, let me have a packet of sulfonilamide. We all had that on our belts. And it was a little paper sack, this powdered drug or something. And he held a thing up, and there was just a drop on it of blood. So I put it on there and seemed to stop any further. So he's got this bird here, and the bird's looking around, having a good time. We walked back to the tent, and we didn't know what they ate particularly. And so we broke out a K ration, and it had these little round metallic things that had the little thing that just wound to open. And it contained either mystery meat or some sort of cheese. Well, this one happened to be mystery meat. Dick put it on the ground and put the bird on the ground out of the tent I'm talking about. And he attacked that can, and he was happy over that. So we thought, well, I guess we gotta do this often. And anyway, the bird walked out the front tent door and walked around, and he did a hand-over-hand type thing sideways and ended up at the top of the pyramidal tent, whereupon he started serenading. And one day he was up there and he decided to try it. So he launched, and of course landed in a heap. And he went back up, and within a couple of weeks, he figured out that if he launched with a good wing down, and he could fly and gain a little bit, and then fold his wings again, drop, and roll, and here's this beautiful, graceful bird up there doing, you know, like we could always tell which one was our bird. He stayed with us. He was free to go wherever he wanted, but he'd come squawking through the front and looking for whatever's in the little can. And the day that we left for OSS, he was gone someplace, so we don't know what happened after that. Now, a little addendum to this story. Last year, I think it was last year, I was asked to speak at 7th grade of Loudoun County in Virginia. And of course I told them war stories, and there were about 300 students, and I thought, well, they're going to think that's all there is. So I told them that story about the bird. And they seemed to like that. And then at the end I gave them a question and answer period. And a lot of them asked different questions. But in relation to this, one kid got up and said, "Well, what's the bird's name?" and honest, another one got up and said, "Is the bird still living?" But I think that's interesting. I don't know if you guys did, but in other words, not every minute were we out doing our duty and so forth. And of course, I told you I like to fly. So if the main maintenance base needed to send a box of widgets up to the 484th, the colonel said, "Well, call Billings, he'll go." And he did. And now, how much time have I got left?
10 minutes.
Enough?
10 minutes.
Okay. 10 minutes? Okay, now, let me ask you if you'd like a question answered that I might know the answer to. Oh my goodness. Nobody wants to, oh, I said, yes.
What was the bird's name?
Touche.
What was your appreciation for the mechanics that took care of your planes all those years?
Well, I don't know if I should say this. Seems like in these days when you say something funny, not funny, but different, it rebounds. But I love my mechanics. I did. I had an incident in the OSS where I got sucked down in a valley with high winds, and I had to overpower the engines. I have no idea of the horsepower, no way of figuring it out, because manifold pressure went around the thing and then went to 9 o'clock. The ground crew chief always met us at the end of a mission, no matter what time of day it was. And I'm relating how I overstressed the engines for about 22 minutes. And of course it was in February, where it was very, very cold and high in the Alps. And I was giving him all the details, and I happened to look at his eyes. I happened to look at his eyes, and the bottom of the eyes were welling up with tears. I gave him a hug. I was the command pilot, and aloft, my word was go, you know. But there'd be a number of people that would fill this room that were on the ground that were supporting that flight. The people who put the packages in the bomb bay, fueling, all of that detail was so I could go fly. To me, the ground crew was tops. And you know, that still is true. We now do, Nevin and I now do Ranger flights regularly. And anybody who knows about an airplane is maintenance costs like hell. Well, we have a mechanic that will not charge for his labor. He says that's my gift to the Angel flight. Oh, and we love him too. Yes.
What was your most memorable mission and why? Your most memorable mission. Which was your most memorable mission?
Well,
Mission and
That would have to be the OSS Green Up mission. And that's been published many, many times in many books. And in fact, if you just go on your cell phone and say to Google Green Up mission, you spend an afternoon finishing the hits. Yes?
Yeah, my father-in-law was a waste gunner and a radio operator, and I can figure out what a waste gunner does. But what did the radio operator do when there was always radio silence?
Oh no, radio silence was silence of a communication that's intelligent. That means that I, as a pilot, if I wanted to talk to somebody else in a nearby airplane, that was silence. That was verboten. Unless you knew they already know we were there. But the radio operator used different frequencies, and it was all Morse code. And he'd get information. For instance, after we left the ground on Green Up mission, he got a radio and handed it to me, and it said, in case no reception, do not come home. Instructions to follow. And that happened. It took 5 days to complete the Green Up mission. But I'm very proud that I was a piece of it. I was a taxi driver. And then I had a team of 3 fantastic men that William Casey, the OSS leader at the time, and subsequent to that, the CIA leader, he said that the Green Up mission was most likely the most important mission in the entire war. And I have my fingerprints on it. I didn't do any fighting, just delivered the people. More? No more questions?
Right here in front.
Yes?
Right here?
Can you tell us about the brass and what did you hear from home? Can you tell us about the brass and what did you hear from home?
Grass.
The uppity ups. Uppity ups.
Oh, brass. Oh yeah, well, they were people too. But we didn't have any adverse feelings. And he also says my immediate commanding officer was Monroe McCluskey. He was a colonel. And I did have a verbal conversation by field phone one time with a general, and it was one of those things where we were spending the night in a forward base, not our own, to complete our mission the next day. And I happened to be overheard and telling that I needed to go back in the morning because my colonel wanted it there. And a young lieutenant came to the door and motioned for me to follow him, and I did. He went down a long hall, and there's a field phone. Do you all know what a field phone was? Had a generator, whatever it was, to crank, to ring the next thing. Anyway, the guy standing there, he says, "Here." And I said, "Hello." The voice said, "This is General of the Army, Oman and Bradley." do you recognize that name? I said, yes, sir. He says, I will not repeat this. You will stay at your present position until your present mission has been completed. Did you hear that? I said, yes, sir. He says, good night. So I had a conversation with General Onan. My tongue got twisted. I'm done.
Well, I think we got time for we got one more question maybe, yeah.
Where? Oh,
What were food and mess services like? Good, bad, indifferent? Your thoughts, sir? Food service.
What was the food service like? Good, bad, or indifferent?
unfortunately, every single trip that I took, for some reason or other, the stewardess didn't come.